Joseph James DeAngelo arrived at his 2020 hearings looking like a man at the end of his life. He sat in a nearly comatose state, slumped in a wheelchair and whispering his responses. But when he was alone in his jail cell, the mask slipped. Jailers watched him discard his cane, perform jumping jacks, and climb up and down his bunk bed with ease. That frailty was a final performance from a man who had spent decades mastering the art of the facade. He was a prolific serial predator who terrorized the state of California while hiding behind the authority of a police badge. For over 40 years, every traditional lead went cold. He wasn't captured through a witness or a tip, but through the microscopic DNA of distant relatives who had simply uploaded their own genetic data to ancestry websites. This case reveals the mechanics of a sociopath who didn't just evade the law. He used his own background in law enforcement and the quiet rhythm of suburban life to maintain absolute control over his victims and his community. Between 1974 and 1986, the violence followed a massive geographic arc across 11 California counties. It began in Visalia with burglaries, moved to Sacramento as sexual assaults, and reached the southern coast as brutal homicides. For decades, investigators believed they were hunting 3 different men. But in 2001, DNA evidence linked the biological samples from the northern and southern sprees, proving that the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, and the original Night Stalker were all the same person. The human cost of this single individual was staggering. He was responsible for more than 120 residential burglaries, over 50 rapes, and 13 murders. The sheer duration and geographic reach of these crimes suggest a level of persistence that went far beyond typical impulsive violence. This was the work of a predator moving across the state with a sustained, calculated focus. He began his career in Visalia with voyeuristic burglaries, spending hours rummaging through women's belongings before escalating his behavior in Sacramento. There, he would stalk single-story homes for days, learning the schedules of his targets before breaking in under the cover of night. Eventually, he escalated, and he began targeting couples. He would wake his victims with a blinding flashlight, brandishing a weapon and forcing the woman to tie up her male partner using shoelaces or cords he had sometimes brought with him or hidden in the house during a previous break-in. In a signature act of psychological torture, he would stack heavy porcelain dishes on the bound man's bare back. He warned the couple that if he heard a single plate fall while he was in the other room, he would kill them both without hesitation. At his crime scenes, investigators found complex, military-style diamond knots used to bind victims. He took small trophies, stolen jewelry, rare coins, and personal photographs. And even years after the attacks, some survivors would pick up the phone to hear his voice, whispering the same sadistic taunts he used in their homes. These methods demonstrate a motive that went beyond physical theft or assault. He sought to install a paralyzing, permanent fear in his victims, thriving on the total psychological submission of those he targeted. Born in 1945 and raised in an unstable military household, DeAngelo's early life was marked by physical abuse and significant trauma. As an adolescent, he exhibited early warning signs of sociopathy, including the torture of animals and repeated burglaries. He used professional structures to hide these impulses. He served as a damage controlman in the Navy during Vietnam and later became an active police officer with a degree in criminal justice, specializing in criminal law. This led to a jarring paradox. He was a husband and a cop, spending his shifts investigating the very types of burglaries he was committing at night. His career in law enforcement only ended when he was caught shoplifting tools of the trade, stealing a hammer and some dog repellent. Profilers identified a highly intelligent offender who seemingly lacked all empathy. By the time he moved to Southern California, a pattern emerged. He would murder, then enter a 6-month refractory period where the compulsion subsided before the next attack. Ultimately, his professional training was his most effective weapon. His knowledge of police tactics allowed him to plan his crimes with a level of precision that kept him undetected for 4 decades. The breakthrough finally arrived in 2018 through a new technique called investigative genetic genealogy, led by investigator Paul Holes and genealogist Barbara Ray Venter. They took the DNA profile from a decades-old crime scene and uploaded it to GED Match, a public database. By identifying distant third cousins, they worked backward through generations of family trees, eventually narrowing the search down to one man who fit the age and location. Police began surveilling the 72-year-old DeAngelo at his home. They waited until he put his trash out on the curb, which made it abandoned property, and secretly recovered a single discarded tissue. The lab results provided a 100% match. The genetic material from that tissue was identical to the DNA left at the crime scenes 40 years earlier. There is a deep irony in his capture. The man who carefully controlled every physical detail of his crimes was finally identified by the one thing he couldn't manipulate: his own biology. Even with DeAngelo in prison, his psychology remains a mystery. His known crimes stopped abruptly in 1986, and investigators still wonder if that silence was due to his age, a change in his domestic life, or a near miss with police that scared him into a permanent retirement. His capture has also forced a conversation about genetic privacy. This case proved that the personal decision to upload DNA can now expose an entire family tree to law enforcement surveillance, regardless of whether those relatives ever consented. DeAngelo was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms. In a ballroom at Sacramento State, the survivors finally took back the narrative, looking him in the eye as they described the decades of resilience it took to see this day arrive. Genetic science is now peeling back the layers of anonymity that once protected unidentified offenders, but it also leaves us with the unsettling reality of Joseph DeAngelo, a man who lived as an ordinary neighbor while holding the secrets of a dozen murders.